Welcome to Civics and Coffee, a history podcast, the show all about United States history, delivered to you in the time it takes to enjoy your morning cup of coffee. I'm your host, Alicia, a historian trained in United States history with a passion for telling both the known and unknown parts of America's past. So grab your coffee and get ready for some bite-sized history. Welcome back, everyone. I am so thrilled that I finally get to release this conversation into the world. Several weeks ago, I sat down with Dr. Austin McCoy to discuss his book, Living in a Daisy Age, which on the surface is a book tracing the history and legacy of the hip hop group De.A.I.S.Y. However, as you will hear in our conversation, Dr. McCoy's book is so much more than a musical history. It's an exploration of culture, labor rights, race relations, and what it was like coming of age in this era of hip hop. It is a book that I think defies genre. I hope you all enjoy our conversation. Hello, everyone. Joining me today is Dr. Austin McCoy. He is an assistant professor of history at West Virginia University, specializing in African American history, labor history, social movements, and hip hop culture. He is also the author of Living in a Daisy Age, the music, culture, and world De.A.I.S.Y. made, which will be the focus of our conversation today. Welcome, Dr. McCoy.
Hi, Alicia. Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much for joining me, and let's dive into this incredible book. So, for
Thank you.
those who may be unfamiliar, who was De La Soul and what inspired your research into the group?
Yeah, so De La Soul is a rap group that formed in the 1980s that comprises of Kelvin Pastanus Mercer, David Trugoy the Dove, Jalacour, and Vincent Maceo Mason. And then, of course, like they worked with Paul Husted, aka DJ Prince Paul. But the members of the group, right, the three members of the group, Maceo, Pastanus, Trugoy, are the principal founders of the group, and they formed in the mid to late 1980s. This was a time when there were a lot of rap groups, punk groups that were forming, breaking apart, and some of the members of De La Soul had been members of other rap groups that didn't really get off the ground. Maceo encountered Prince Paul or met Prince Paul, first, and sort of he introduced Prince Paul to the other two members of the group. All of them are from Long Island, right? I mean, so like they weren't born in Long Island, but but they all were raised in Long Island. And yeah, 1986, 87, 88, the group takes shape and they begin to record some of their singles that, end up on 3 Feet High and Rising, which comes out in 1989. And the story behind me writing the book is I'd always been a fan of De La Soul. I've always been a fan of hip hop culture, rap music, and I feel like it was sort of my first research interest. I mean, so long before I ever thought I'd become a historian, like rap music and sort of, listening to it, reading all the magazines, paying attention to the history, paying attention to all the news. That was sort of the first, time. I feel like that was like my first intellectual endeavor. And it wasn't just me, many of my friends in high school were doing the same thing. We were always sort of, listening together, debating who was better and debating which albums we thought were classic. And, so that sort of laid, the immediate foundation. And I'd been tweeting about, David Jalacour's passing in 2023, and an editor reached out and asked if I would be interested in writing a book. And I thought it was an amazing opportunity. So I took it. And that's sort of when I began to start that writing. But, the other piece too is I teach hip hop history as well. I taught it when I was at Auburn University and I teach it here at West Virginia University. So, that's also a piece of inspiration as well.
An incredible syllabus that you published online, if I remember
Yeah,
correctly.
yeah, yeah.
Yes. And as you mentioned, the group is kind of built their lives in Long Island. So how did the group's geographic origins kind of inspire their technique and lyrical choices?
Yeah, I mean, so when we think about the history of rap music, we tend to think about, the five boroughs, New York City, especially hip hop starting in the Bronx with Clive Campbell, DJ Kool Herc. in the party that his sister threw, the back to school party his sister threw, Cindy Campbell. So we tend to think about, South Bronx, Queensbridge, Queens, generally Brooklyn. But then Long Island had its own sort of developing hip hop culture. Of course, some of the music and the practices were coming from the five boroughs, but whether you had, De La Soul, Biz Marquee, Rakim, Public Enemy, right? I mean, like, so they were from Long Island as well. EPMD, right? I mean, all these artists that were popping up, in Long Island. And when it comes to De La Soul, it seems that the suburban aesthetic, right? I mean, they really embrace it on songs like Potholes in My Lawn, right? I mean, so sort of the metaphor of, De La Soul, Trugoy, and Pasta News sort of constantly sort of, filling in the potholes. And when they talk about filling in the potholes, they're talking about trying to get rid of, subpar rappers who are in the culture, right? I mean, and yeah, taking care of one's lawn is, very much of a suburban thing, right? I mean, so like that's one direct inspiration
Yeah.
behind, the sort of the sound and the aesthetic of at least 3 Feet High and Rising. But then also you sort of hear it in the content, right? I mean, like they still talk about what's happening in the inner city, but they're talking about what's happening around them, right? I mean, so like you don't get the sort of very graphic, violent depictions of, day to day life like you might when you listen to Grandmaster Flash and the Furious Five's The Message, So there's that piece. And then, of course, Long Island, Pasta News talks about how like he grew up close to like Jerry Seinfeld, or I mean, like, so like there's this sort of cultural diversity, whether it's black folks, white folks, Jewish folks, so they're growing up sort of in that environment and in that context as well. So obviously, growing up in New York City in one of the five boroughs, you're also living in a very diverse context, but this sort of suburban, layout in that history and black folks living in suburbia and growing up there is something that one, not too many of us who don't study metropolitan or urban history may not think about. Of course, those who do, are well aware of this phenomenon of Black suburbia. But then also when we think about the history of hip hop, we also, don't think about Black suburbia.
Yeah, and I think one of the themes that kinda comes through the book a lot is De La Soul's kind of always challenging the norms,
Yeah.
and one of the kind of early things that they do is kind of challenging what it means to be a rapper. So, in what ways did De La Soul kind of challenge what it meant to be a rapper, especially in the late '80s?
Yeah, so I think with like the first thing you can do is go to Me, Myself, and I, right? I mean, like that's sort of always been my exhibit A or exhibit one. And you watch the video and no, it's yeah, Pasta News, Maceo and Trugoy, they walk into this classroom and they're full of other like in this classroom is full of other people who are dressed like Run DMC, Eric B. and Rakim, LL Cool J, right? I mean, so like they're all
Mhm.
sort of wearing either sort of, these Adidas tracksuits, Kangol hats, big gold chains, and they might be wearing like the big glasses that DMC wears. And you sort of see like what hip hop, is sort of looking like in the late 1980s, if watch them walk into the classroom. And then of course them three, they look, different. They're wearing button-down shirts and they're Apostanews obviously is wearing glasses that he raps about, and they're wearing peace medallions and African medallions, right? I mean, so like they're walking into rap music. Like if the classroom is rap music at that time. They're walking into rap music, looking very different. And they also sound different. Like, I mean, their delivery is, at least on that song, is more deadpan. It is more calm. They're not yelling like, Run DMC or LL Cool J when he first came out. In De La Soul, they are sort of articulating their own language, right? I mean, so they're one of the first groups to sort of not necessarily engage in rapping abstractly. And sort of what I mean by that is putting together verses that are sort of just riddled with double meanings and metaphors or don't seem to mean anything, right? I mean, like that's sort of what abstract rap can be. So like they're doing all of this and they are coming in with a new sound and a new aesthetic. And then the other sort of layer to them challenging what's taking place in rap at the time is, they're more willing to be more irreverent, more vulnerable, more playful as well, right? I mean, so I think, the whimsical or the whimsiality ality of the first album is something that also sets them apart from, those who are, like Big Daddy Kane, right? Who's sort of the first, seen as one of the first, sex symbols in rap music, right? I mean, so yeah, like they're sort of setting themselves against and apart from just about everyone else who's popular at the time.
And maybe expanding a little bit on that, can you talk a little bit about how maybe they complicated and then expanded definitions of Black masculinity?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, so if you think about some of the stereotypes, especially that were, circulating about rappers as, being hard, obviously being violent, or sort of, this sort of picks up more into the these sort of, you'd have folks who would, claim that rappers were glorifying violence. You had, yeah, Ice-T, NWA, right? I mean, like you had sort of gangster rap sort of bubbling up, but even though gangster rap was, a lot more complicated than that, it was, it wasn't just, yes, it had its, very problematic aspects when it came to, rapping about violence, including misogynist lyrics, but it was also very political. Whereas with De La Soul, yeah, I think this, idea of being willing to be vulnerable, to be more emotionally open. I wouldn't necessarily say that they were like the most emotionally open rap artists, but it was more so than what, we had sort of experienced or what you had experienced as a fan when sort of thinking about, how they would rap about, being, sort of, anxious about, sort of living day to day on songs like Tread Water, which is a, sort of great song, which is a fable, but then also, but yeah, and they're rapping, about trying to survive, but they're rapping to like other animals who are talking back to them, right? I mean, like, so De La Soul is willing to sort of, get more vulnerable. And especially when you move from 3 Feet High and Rising to De La Soul is Dead, they also are sort of presenting themselves like where I would say the sort of hippie aesthetic or the Daisy
Mhm.
aesthetic, right? And Daisy referring to the inner soul, y'all, right? And this idea of, being as authentic as possible in your art. De La Soul basically kills off, right, their initial aesthetic because of the perceptions that they were hippies, that they were sort of just strictly peace loving and sort of these ideas around the counterculture and them sort of embracing the day glow, embracing the bright colors, meant that they were also quote unquote soft, right? I mean,
Mhm.
so, they challenged this on De La Soul is Dead by killing off the Daisy and also rapping about some of the times where they gotten into fistfights with
Yeah.
people because people tried to test them because they thought that they were, soft black men, right? I mean, so yeah, they were always sort of treading this boundary between wanting to be authentic, vulnerable, but then also feeling like they needed to protect themselves and sort of not wanting to be pigeonholed as, just black nerds, even though they made it acceptable, right, to be weird and nerdy throughout their career.
Yeah. Well, and kind of looking at the music and analyzing these albums, you write quite beautifully that 3 Feet High and Rising is utopian in its sonic anarchy and lyricism. So, what about this album made it such an act of defiance?
I think, one, you have the production of the album, right? I mean, and them you sort of incorporating as just scores of samples into the music and sort of so on the one hand, right? I mean, like they're rebelling against, the production that mostly relied upon like James Brown or some of the older break beats that that had, become popular in rap music in the late 1970s, early 90s, whether it is sort of like disco based or electronic based. De La Soul sort of expanded the sonic palette of rap music. So, they're sampling, Parliament Funkadelic. They are sampling, 80s R&B, pop, but they're also sampling, Schoolhouse Rock, Liberace, right? I mean, like, so like they're bringing in all these sources, in a way that is similar to the Bomb Squad of, Public Enemy's production team, or even the Dust Brothers and the Beastie Boys on Paul's Boutique, right? I mean, so I consider Takes a Nation, a Million to Hold Us Back by Public Enemy, Paul's Boutique, 3 Feet High and Rising as sort of like cousins, right? I mean, they all come out around the same time. They employ this sort of collage sampling, but De La Soul's, I think, sound is brighter, right? I mean, like it's more brighter. It's a little more upbeat. Public Enemy, like they're about noise, right? I mean, so like they're bringing in various sources, but but they're trying to sort of create something that is like jarring to the ear. The Beastie Boys' sound on Paul's Boutique is a little more subdued, operates on a lower frequency, and and becomes a sort of progenitor of other, especially West Coast artists. I don't think you get like DJ Muggs or DJ Shadow without Paul's Boutique. Whereas, yeah, 3 Feet High and Rising, it is just bright as the cover of the album, right? I mean, so you get that, and then, like I said, De La Soul's deploying their own language. But then, of course, they are elevating the rap album to high art in a sense of, like it is organized around a theme. It's organized, it's organized around a concept, of a game show. And then there's like all these skits or what Prince Paul refers to as bug out pieces that sort of stitch these songs together, and these skits are mostly comedic, on this album. And they are laying the foundation for other artists to to sort of create more theatrical art pieces in rap music. Whether it is NWA sort of incorporating more skits on their second album, or even Wu-Tang into the 36 Chambers, they do so as well, right? I mean, so like 3 Feet High and Rising is something it's an album that is, bucking all the trends in rap music at the time. It is also sort of creating, making rap into art in a way that, previous albums had not done before. And then, yeah, like is an album that has one foot in a sort of reality, and another foot in just surreality or fantasy
Mhm.
in the sense of having songs, like Tread Water. You see, you watch the video and listen to Potholes in My Lawn, right? I mean, that sort of feels very surreal. But then you also have them addressing the crack cocaine crisis on Say No Go, right? I mean, which
Mhm.
is also a sort of interesting, clash of topics and sounds in a sense of like there's a couple of critics who call Say No Go like the most danceable anti-drug music or anti-drug song out there, right? I mean, so De La Soul, they're doing a lot on this album, but then it sort of comes together, and it in this sort of joyousness of the album stands in stark contrast to the Reagan era
Yeah.
in the sort of the growth of more inequality, all of the violence surrounding the war on drugs, the violence that's taken place in inner cities, the sort of cuts to social services and job programs coming out of the Reagan administration, but then also obviously the sort of, the racism that is still percolating in the United
Mm.
States, whether it is through policy or through racist policing and some of the, police and vigilante killings of Black folks, especially in New York City during the 1980s.
Well, and kind of what this book does quite well is that it's not only kind of an analysis of De La Soul's catalog, but it also kind of does a broader analysis of kind of the evolution of music and hip hop culture as well. And so you kind of highlight how the 1990s was a pivotal moment for the rap genre. So, what was it about the era that made the music such a powerful force for so many?
Yeah, rap music very much matures, right? I mean, in the 1990s, in the sense of, and not necessarily in the content, of course, or the lyrics, but in the sense of you just have an explosion of rap artists and rap groups in the 1990s, and rap is sonically, more diverse, right? So going into the 1990s, obviously, you have gangster rap that is still emerging. You have Ghetto Boys and rap coming out of Houston, and soon enough, you're going to get Outkast coming out of Atlanta. So, like, hip hop is spreading more geographically at this time. You have scenes popping up in Detroit and Chicago as well. But then, yeah, like you begin to see sort of a splint, like I don't like a sort of splintering is too strong of a word because it sort of suggests that these subgenres aren't related in any way, but no, you have rappers who begin to sort of adopt a more sort of jazzy sound, right? I mean, so a
Mm.
Tribe Called Quest is Low End Theory, The Far Side's Bizarre Ride to the Far Side. De La Soul sort of plugs into this as well with Balloon Mind State. Obviously, like I said, gangster rap. You have sort of more East Coast boom bap with KRS-One, Wu-Tang Clan dropping into the Wu-Tang 36 Chambers sort of just opens up a different type of rap music that is influenced by what they thought was sort of like Far East culture, Asian culture. So rap music is sort of, like there to choose from in terms of
Yeah.
artists, in terms of genre, like you have, more female rap, more women rappers who are sort of coming in like Queen Latifah, MC Light, later on into the decade, Lil Kim, Foxy Brown. So it's like, yeah, you have sort of just this expansion of the genre and more record labels that are investing in it, whether they are signing rappers themselves, like Columbia signing Nas, or sort of signing record companies, like Interscope eventually doing with Death Row Records, or even, the formation of more independent record labels, like, Bad Boy, Arista, right? I mean, so you just have this expansion of the genre and an expansion of the rap industry. In some ways, you do have some doors that begin to sort of close when it comes to sort of rappers, producing more politically themed albums, right? I mean, like you'll
Mhm.
still have, politically themed tracks, but by 1993 and into the mid 1990s, right? I mean, we see less, obviously NWAs, less Public Enemies. Ice Cube is, not rapping about politics as much as he did in 1989, 90, and 91, right? I mean, so you have some, I would say, negative changes when it comes to the genre as well. And then, of course, we get to the mid 1990s in the, what I basically have been calling the rap wars. I mean, I wish I could think of a better term for that, but it's just like a term that just doesn't focus on the rap beef between the Notorious B.I.G. and Tupac Shakur and Bad Boy Records and Death Row Records. You had bunch of rappers in New York City who were going after each other. You had rappers, in the Midwest who were going after each other as well. And then of course, with the conflict between Tupac and Death Row and Bad Boy and Biggie, there were very much like gang and street elements that were involved in that as well. Right. I mean, so in that situation, it was a lot more than just about the music. And it was probably the murders having, a little less to do with the music than
Yeah.
sort of like either Tupac's affiliations, and Death Row's affiliations with gangs in Los Angeles, right? I mean, so this moment people sort of like to think back on and sort of think about how it changed hip hop. Very complicated, and also a very much a turning point in the history of the genre and the culture.
Yeah. Well, and so we have this shift in the genre. It's kind of maturing, and we have De La Soul's sophomore album, which you kind of describe as kind of a stark departure from their debut. So, how was it different, and kind of what motivated their approach?
Yeah, I mean, so De La Soul is Dead, um, comes out 1991. My favorite De La Soul album, like, and I don't know if that's ever really gonna change, even though, like, I like all their albums. Like, I just, that album is special to me. And, no, like, when you go back and listen to the first album, and the last song on the first album is called Daisy Age, right? I mean, and it's sort of a declaration, that, De La Soul has not only entered into the classroom that is rap music, but it's here to stay and it's a daisy age, which implies, right, that you're going to be living in De La Soul's world. So, you get to the end of that album, you hear that song, you're like, wow, like you just assume that there's going to be more of this, more of this style to come. And then you pick up De La Soul is Dead and you see the knocked over flower pot. The album cover is not as colorful, and you see the title of the album and you're just like, well, what's going on here? They are killing themselves off, right? I mean, like that's the question that you ask yourself. And at this time in the late 1980s, early 1990s, you think, well, how many successful rappers and rap groups just completely go back on what made them successful? You really can't find many, right? I mean, like, you don't really start to see this until later, in the 90s with some artists like Outkast, right? I mean, so De La Soul, they wanted to challenge their prior their style and their aesthetic, because in some ways the marketing strategies of Tommy Boy Records were almost too successful, right? I mean,
Yeah.
so Tommy Boy Records, really, at least according to the members of the group, really like capitalized on the Daisy aesthetic, and Trugoy, Maceo, and Pastanus, sort of got tired of, constantly like taking pictures and being around, a bunch of flowers all the time, and constantly being asked whether or not they were hippies, and asking if, or sort of having to sort of confront sort of, the expectations of producing another 3 Feet High and Rising. And you sort of hear this on songs like Pass the Plugs, where True Goy sort of references Tommy Boy asking if they would give them another Say No Go, right? They're sort of having to confront what really made them, or what endeared them to so many fans and critics, and they had to confront fame. And how they did so was, well, we're just gonna, actually go back and just basically kill off the Daisy, and we're gonna present ourselves in a sort of more, they're still presenting themselves as complicated black men, but sort of what they incorporate is a little more hardness, in a willingness to sort of rap about some of the conflicts that they get into on the road. They rap more explicitly about more serious topics. So Millie pulled a pistol on Santa is about a young woman who experiences sexual violence at the hands of her father, and she ends up murdering him while he is playing Santa at a local Macy's. Pastanus raps about his brother being a drug addict. Oh, my brother's a basehead, right? I mean, so like they're rapping more explicitly about more serious topics. Their lyrics are a little more sarcastic. They're rapping about fighting, and also like the album in itself. Again, another concept album where it sort of follows a few young men who find a copy of De La Soul is Dead in the trash, and they start listening to it, and they start, dissing De La Soul, right? I mean, like, so, but De La Soul is like even dissing themselves on the album as well, right? I mean, so no, like one of my favorite albums, like, and I just feel like it sort of builds on 3 Feet High and Rising, and that it is a little more theatrical. And I think that album sort of lays the foundation for more theatrical concept albums that we would see later on, whether it is like Prince Paul's A Prince Among Thieves, Kendrick Lamar's Good Kid, Mad City, or even Hamilton, I believe, right? I mean, like, I
Mhm.
think this album, it's hard to sort of think of those albums and not think about De La Soul is Dead.
And I think this has kind of been a theme in our discussion thus far, but what are some of the ways that De La Soul kind of challenged the mainstream?
Yeah, I mean, whether it is their first album and they are sort of challenging the dominant black masculine aesthetics of rap music that is, embodied by Run DMC, Rakim, Big Daddy Kane, the Fat Boys. And then you get to De La Soul is Dead, which is, no, like they're challenging themselves, which is, again, rappers aren't doing this, right? Rappers aren't going off and sort of, killing off what made them popular. And then you get the Balloon Mind State, and they do adopt a more jazzy aesthetic, and they invite members of the James Brown's horn section to play on the album. But they, in songs like Ego Trippin' Part 2, De La Soul is really sort of making fun of, popular rap music at the time. This, in this song, and especially video, gets them in trouble with Tupac, right? I mean, like, because Tupac Shakur believed that Ego Trippin' Part 2, the video, was making fun of I Get Around, right? I mean, like, so that, which was like one of Tupac's first big commercial hits, right? I mean, so when you watch Ego Trippin', you sort of see Trugoy is driving in a Mercedes Benz, pulls up to this mansion where there's this party going on, and like they are, sort of, spoofing, what they thought was, sort of the emerging materialism, or really the false materialism in rap music, right? I mean, so they were sort of ahead of the curve in 1993, with that song and video. And then you get to 1996 with Stakes is High, and that's when they basically launch a full sort of frontal critique of rap music that's in the mainstream. So they're criticizing gangster rap, they're criticizing the materialism in rap music. This album is not uncomplicated, or sort of, it is problematic in the sense of the ways in which that Pasta News addresses, some of the women rappers on one of the songs on that album as well, right? I mean, sort of criticizing the way that they decide to dress. And it's just like, so like they are sort of taking aim at a lot of different styles of rap, what they see is going on. Trugoy the Dove sort of, says like, I got issues or questions with you if you're ready, if you're ready to die, right? And that's obviously a paraphrase, but it's also a reference to Notorious B.I.G.'s first album, Ready to Die, right? I mean, this
Mhm.
sort of, this death defying black masculinity that we see in folks like Notorious B.I.G., Tupac Shakur, other gangster rappers who are, some people would say, glorifying violence, and some others would say that they're talking about the violence that they see around them, right? I mean,
Yeah.
so obviously there's a conflict there, but no, like, gangster rap continues to attract the ire of, politicians, black leaders, but in this case, within rap music, groups like De La Soul, right? I mean, so Stakes is High is sort of the culmination of De La Soul's vociferous critique of mainstream rap music.
And of course, they've always had a little bit of a rebellious streak, as
Yeah.
evidenced by their digital email campaign for their
Yeah.
catalog during the rise of streaming. So, can you
Yeah.
talk a little bit about this and kind of what it meant for the group and the music industry?
Yeah. So this is one of the reasons why I started the book with talking about teaching or trying to teach and talk about De La Soul in the streaming age.
Yeah.
So of course, for much of the 2010s and up until 2023, De La Soul's catalog was not available on Spotify, Apple Music, um, or even iTunes at the time, Pandora, right? I mean, like, so their Tommy Boy catalog, their first 6 albums, the only way you could listen to it is maybe there might be songs still floating around on YouTube, or if you kept the physical copies, if you had physical copies and you kept them, or you had sort of downloaded them at some point. So in 2014, early 2014, they announced that they basically have a present for all their fans. And, they asked their fans to sign up on this email list. And so, I signed up a couple times, even though I still own, the physical copies. It's like, well, of course, right? I mean, so, and then on Valentine's Day, they sent out, basically MP3s or zip files of, their first 6 albums, and they made them available for free. And, this was in the era where where folks are talking about breaking the internet and sort of this is what happened with De La Soul. I mean, it's like so many people signed up and tried to download their albums that it crashed servers, right? I mean, so this was obviously in rebellion against their circumstances with not having control over their master recordings and their music. So Tommy Boy had owned the rights to their music for a long time. They sold them to Warner Brothers. Basically, Tommy Boy sells its whole catalog to Warner Brothers. And then at some point in the late 2010s, Tommy Boy reacquires De La Souls and other Tommy Boy records music, right? I mean, so what ends up happening in response to this email campaign is that Warner Brothers issues a cease and desist, right? I mean, which is very ironic, right? I mean, like asking the artists who created their art to cease giving away their own art. So like that highlights the levels of irony and exploitation within the music industry in a way that only De La Soul could do. But then it also really kicks off this campaign, that's one sort of a public campaign, just mobilize their fans in order to support them in reacquiring the rights to their music. But then, of course, this sort of this legal campaign, right? I mean, because again, like the dispute sort of centered around basically who had to sort of incur the risk of being sued if anyone who believes that De La Soul sort of wrongfully sampled them, decides to take them to court, basically. And this sort of stretches back to the conflict between De La Soul and the Turtles. So De La Soul samples a song from the Turtles, and the Turtles basically it's a skit, right? I mean, so they don't even rap on this song, right? I mean, transmitting live from Mars. They don't rap on the song. It's just a slowed down version of a song from the Turtles. So De La Soul claims that they sort of sought to clear the sample. And, usually when artists are sampling other artists and other sources, at that time they would have to fill out this form listing the name of the song, And then of course, like the record label would sort of go find the publisher or the owner of the song and try to get the song cleared. De La Soul claims that they tried to get the song cleared. Tommy Boy says that De La Soul never did. Right. I mean, so like that was sort of an early moment of conflict between De La Soul and Tommy Boy. And then this sort of carries into the 2010s where Tommy Boy Records is trying to find ways to put their music on streaming, but they want De La Soul to have to foot the bill if anyone sues them, right? I mean, like it foot most of the bill. So, like De La Soul obviously is not happy with this arrangement because I think their arrangement at first was sort of a 90-10 split in profits, basically with Tommy Boy getting 90% and De La Soul getting 10%. And obviously that is just completely imbalanced. And so, yeah, this sort of kicks off, right? I mean, this fight between Tommy Boy and De La Soul, which is resolved, because you have like sort of firms and other corporations, another corporation stepping in and buying De La Soul's catalog and basically, giving De La Soul its catalog back. You think about what happened with De La Soul and sort of the streaming situation. You think of other artists who have had issues with their catalog, like Taylor Swift, right? Who goes back and re-records her albums, right? I mean, in order for her to sort of the rights and revenues to her music, it exposes the problem of streaming generally and sort of
Yeah.
if you are a consumer, you're basically just renting access to music. You don't sort of have, you don't own, so to speak, the music that you buy. So, of course, you have much of recorded music in the palm of your hand, but the trade off is, well, a record label could just pull an artist's album, or an artist can pull their own songs and albums from Spotify, for instance. So, like there's that trade-off that you have. Whereas like if you have the ability to own physical media, you don't have to experience that trade-off. Or if like or if some services, if Amazon services goes down, right? I mean,
Yeah.
like listening, watching TV, watching movies, right? I mean, like you don't get access to that. So De La Soul situation sort of also help expose the limitations of the streaming economy and the streaming model of music consumption. And in some ways, you listen to Cabin in the Sky. That's it's in the same sort of vein of their other albums as being these long concept albums. And you could argue that Cabin in the Sky is also sort of challenging the streaming model of music production, because music production has also changed due to streaming, because artists are putting out shorter songs, shorter albums. You don't get as many skits. And De La Soul said, no, we're still going to put out our 20-track album in 2025, and we're going to give you a full, we're going to give you our way of sort of putting together a full piece of art, right? I mean, so their sort of rebellion sort of even extends into the present moment.
Yeah. Well, and that kinda goes to their Kickstarter campaign, right?
Yeah.
So, yeah, talk about the De La Soul Kickstarter campaign. What motivated that decision? And kind of, they always are kind of redefining success. So, what did success mean for them?
Yeah, I mean, so they launched a Kickstarter campaign like soon after they launched this email listserv in sort of in this effort to sort of get their music back, or at least their Tommy Boy catalog back. And yeah, like so Kickstarter. I mean, because I feel like we hear less about Kickstarter now. I mean, it's basically at this point, I mean, like obviously crowdsourcing is still a thing with, folks having to sort of go to fund me and
Mhm.
services like that. But Kickstarter, I think it still exists, of course, and it's this platform for artists, especially to be able to raise money in order to fund projects. And, what artists will do is sort of they will create a page explaining, their projects, explaining the vision of what they hope to do, and De La Soul was really the first major rap artist to do something like this. I believe TLC had also sort of started their own campaign because, I mean, speaking of industry exploitation, they had gone broke, right? And of course, when we think about artists, quote unquote, going broke, we think of, artists who are being irresponsible with their money, right? I mean, but it's like, no, like TLC was just trapped in an incredibly exploitative contract, right? I mean, so like TLC is sort of, they're raising money in order to sort of, try to continue their careers and to raise some revenue. De La Soul is their circumstances are different in the sense of they're like, we want to see if we can get more buy-in from our fans, but then also it would give De La Soul a way to sort of have more control over the recording, have more ownership control over the music. But then also it was a way for them to give back to their fans as well, right? I mean, so if you sign up for their email list, you would get these updates about their Kickstarter campaign. So, like when they launched it, they raised, I think, like more than $600,000. It was an insane amount of money for a Kickstarter campaign at that time, right? I mean, and I think their goal was, I think, like low six figures, right? I mean, like it wasn't like super high, right? I mean, but they exceeded it within 48 to 72 hours, which obviously still demonstrated De La Soul's central place in rap music and fans' love for the group. So they raise all this money, and what they do with this money is they basically use it to fund the creation of And the Anonymous Nobody, right? I mean, so it allows them to hire a band that plays on the album. They do these jam sessions, and De La Soul will like sample these jam sessions. It allows De La Soul to like bring in more mainstream artists, right? I mean, so like this is the album where they're collaborating with folks like Snoop Dogg, Usher, Jill Scott, right? Like artists we wouldn't necessarily have thought that they would be willing to collaborate with in the 1990s, right? I mean, so they're doing this. They are using these resources. They use these resources to produce a couple of short documentaries, about their history, and then also the recording of the Anonymous Nobody. And they use these resources to again, sort of fund these, rewards for fans who might have donated, X amount of dollars. Like you could go on you can go, shoe shopping with Dave, or you could, go to be a VIP at a De La Soul show, or you can sort of buy some memorabilia like that, is sort of rare, right? I mean, so they mobilize these resources in a way that helps expand their community, right? I mean, which is very interesting, right? They're not just taking the money and saying, we're just going to produce this album and we're going to be done with it. Like they use it to actually build and expand community of fans of them and of rap music. But then also they use this, but of course they use this money to produce an album and a bunch of singles and a couple documentaries. And this album, before Cabin in the Sky was the latest album that De La Soul came out with, and it comes out in 2016. And no, I think up until that point, that was their most personal album to date.
Well, okay, you spend this book analyzing De La Soul's songs quite deeply, thinking about their entire catalog. Which do you think is their most important contribution to the genre and why?
Okay, so album, I'll start with album. Album 3 Feet High Rising, of course. Even though De La Soul is my favorite album, 3 Feet High and Rising, I mean, it just opens up so many doors and so many paths within rap music. Like I said, 3 Feet High and Rising, it influences NWA, Wu-Tang Clan. It influences like Pop Deep, like it influences Lil Kim, right? I mean, like any album that is a concept album with a bunch of skits, 3 Feet High and Rising is one of the main progenitors of that, but then of course it's hard to get artists like Outkast or Missy Elliott without De La Soul in this album, right? I mean, so, I would say that, like, there's a reason why the Library of Congress, sort of incorporated that album, into the registry. In terms of song, I mean, because I feel like that's also like
Mhm.
implicitly part of the question. I think like their most important song, like, and of course this could change, day to day. I'm gonna say I Am IB, right? I mean, and it's a song that appears on Balloon Mind State. And it's a very personal song, at least from Pastanuse's perspective. And Pastanuse raps about having a daughter, some of his other personal situations. He's rapping about some of the tensions within the Native Tongues collective, right, which is De La Soul, Tribe Called Quest, Black Sheep, Queen Latifah, Moni Love, Jungle Brothers, right? I mean, like, so, he's rapping about some of the tensions on in his first verse. He's also commenting about the exploitation of how the rap industry and the music industry exploits Black artists. So, like, his first verse on that song is, I think, one of his best verses. generally, and one of the I would say one of the better verses in rap music, and it's probably underrated if you ask people like, "So what are your 10 favorite verses?" This verse may not appear on a lot of people's top 10 lists, but I think it's important because it demonstrated that De La Soul was willing to be a lot more introspective. They weren't just joking around, or they weren't just rapping about being hard, or they weren't just, rapping about situations that were happening to other people. Posthumous, at the very least, was willing to rap about how he was feeling at the time, what he was feeling, and is taking stock of where he was as a young but sort of a young black man who was sort of considered like a veteran in rap music, right? I mean, like, they were well into their 20s at the time. And when you're in your 20s in the early 90s, it was thought that you may not have a career past that, right? I mean, so
Mhm.
I think that song, in addition to like all the shout outs at the beginning, you hear like Q-Tip's voice, Moni Love's voice, Bob Power, who is, a legendary engineer who just passed away in the last week. Like you hear his voice, right? I mean, like, so in a way, like you sort of get much of the native tongue family, but the song itself is about, at least Pasanusa's verse is about himself and him sort of letting all of us know sort of how he's feeling. So I would like right now, that song to me, I think might be their most important.
Well, and how does knowing the story of De La Soul help us kind of understand the evolution of music broadly and hip hop specifically?
Yeah, I mean, so on the one hand, with De La Soul and thinking about the sort of broad evolution of music, on the one hand, right, I mean, like, I feel like 3 Feet High and Rising especially, but 3 Feet High and Rising, De La Soul is Dead and Blue Mind State are sort of like these portals, right? I mean, so, and portals into the past in some ways, right? I mean, like, so the ways in which that they are either drawing from one of the oldest, genres of American music, which is jazz, or sort of sampling, using their first 2 albums, and they're sampling music from the 50s and the 60s and the 70s and the 80s and even the early 90s, right? So, like, you listen to the first 3 albums and you're at least implicitly receiving a history of music generally. And of course, as they're sampling and taking from all these sources, they're producing something new, right? I mean, so in some ways, right, like you get these 3 albums that are a portal to the past, but then also they let us know what's going to happen in the future where you begin to see more sort of conspicuous sampling, right? I mean, from Sean Combs and his Hitman group of producers, you begin to obviously continue to see more fusion of genres, right? I mean, like I think De La Soul is Dead is incorporating house music, rock, punk music, R&B, like I mean, so it's incorporating so much. And of course, like the rap rock fusion thing was not new in 1991. I mean, Run DMC had pioneered this, but De La Soul is also collaborating with alternative rock groups like Teenage Fan Club in the early 1990s, right? I mean, which is anticipating more of the rap rock, sort of collaborations that we see in the late 1990s. And then of course, you just think about the ways in which, just artists across genre are sampling, rap music, past pop music, past R&B music, right? I mean, like, so, De La Soul helps sort of set the foundation for contemporary artists in the 21st century of doing this as well. And then I think when it comes to rap music more specifically, De La Soul, they established they set a precedent of, okay, we're going to be a group that does not produce the same album every time we release an album, right?
Mhm.
And obviously, with the shift from 3 Feet High and Rising to De La Soul is Dead, this establishes this. But then, yeah, we get jazz in Blue Mind State, more boom bap in Stakes is High. We get, sort of a throwback to sort of more, uh, you know, old school rap slash incorporation of other artists in the first Artificial Intelligence, the Mosaic Thump album. We get more R&B, and more quote unquote neo soul on AOI Bionics. We get, and then like the Grind Day is sort of another throwback, but they're collaborating more with Jay Dilla, right? And then the Anonymous Nobody, right? Like they use a band, right? I mean, so like all the albums are different, right? I mean, and
Yeah.
we could think of other artists who have sort of replicated this. Outkast, right? I mean, like Southern Playlist, like Cadillac Music is not the same as Atlan's, is not the same as Equimini is not the same as Stankonia, right? Like, or you get sort of these out of the box albums like Missy Elliott's first album. It's hard to sort of think about, Pharrell and the Neptunes without thinking about De La Soul.
Mm,
Of course, Odd Future, Tyler the Creator, like this sort of collective with Tyler the Creator, Earl Sweatshirt. You don't get, it's hard to imagine them without De La Soul. Tyler the Creator's discography, right? I mean, like he gets to a point where it's like, he goes on a run where like all of his albums are different. He's explicitly trying to do something different on every album.
yeah.
Like I said, with Kendrick Lamar, Good Kid, Mad City, but then you get To Pimp a Butterfly with To Pimp a Butterfly, which is very jazz inflected, right? I mean, like, so it's like you can sort of see De La Soul's fingerprints, throughout, rap. Dochi's album, Alligator Bites Never Heal, right? I mean, like it's a concept album. It's an album about dealing with personal and emotional struggles, therapy. It's hard to sort of listen to that album and not think about 3 Feet High and Rising, and also not think about songs like I Am I Be, right?
Yeah.
Where Posthumous is getting personal, right? I mean, so De La Soul's, family tree, so to speak, is huge. And
Yeah.
it just continues to grow because there's just a lot of artists where it's hard to not make the connection because you're probably going to find some aspect of De La Soul in them.
Well, and shifting the focus from De La Soul to the author a little bit. This is a musical analysis and it
Yeah.
is a cultural history, but it's also a little bit of a memoir.
Yeah.
So I want to ask you, could you share the motivation and kind of thought process behind
Yeah.
incorporating some of your personal story into the narrative?
Yeah. So when I was thinking about, when I was sort of planning to write this book and I sat down and when I was writing the proposal, I basically just started with my reaction to watching the Stakes is High video for the first time. And it just made sense. It was like, what does De La Soul mean to me? And, I would say there was sort of a intangible reason for this, like, which is sort of like, you know, when I think about music and the power of music, it's typically personal and it could also be communal as well, right? I mean, so like there's that piece. And then there was an aspect of this that was practical in the sense of outside of my friends, right? So outside of my friends, family, people who might follow me on social media, like who am I? Right? Like who am I to write this book? Right? I mean,
Mhm.
like this isn't me sitting down and writing a book based upon my dissertation, although someone at some point might write a dissertation on De La Soul, right? I mean, so they may not feel that they have to sort of include a justification for doing so. Whereas for me, it was like, well, this is coming out of nowhere. So for some people, it might come out of nowhere. So like, how am I the one who's going to do this? And especially when a lot of music writing is, mostly done by, trained and experienced music critics, trained and experienced journalists. There's been a couple of De La Soul books that have come out before mine, even like, Marcus Moore's High and Rising is one that comes to mind. I wanted to sort of show people, how like what my relationship to the group was, right? In
Mhm.
addition to trying to think about them historically and analytically, right? I mean, and in doing so, it was me wanting to, on the one hand, sort of acknowledge that I'm an outsider, so to speak, compared to
Hmm.
some other people who write about music. But then on the other hand, it would have been hard for me to write this book or to write a book about a group I love so much without including how I felt the first time I watched Stakes is High or listened to Stakes is High or listened to De La Soul is Dead, or sort of thinking about the ways in which I grew up listening to De La Soul's music. So even when they weren't as active in the 2000s, I was still listening to them, right? I mean, and obviously I was having my own personal experiences, good and bad, right? I mean, so no, I wanted to sort of give folks an understanding of my education as both a rap fan, a student of rap, and of course, a student of history generally,
Yeah.
and a student of politics as well, right? I mean, so like, yeah, that I was trying to do both of these things, right? I mean, like on the one hand, I want people to sort of know like how music has shaped my life and shaped me as a historian, but then also it was also a way to say, okay, like, it was also a way to justify me writing this book. and letting folks know who might be more experienced, might be a lot more of an experienced critic than I am, where I'm coming from too.
Yeah. I felt it was a nice, grounding theme throughout the whole book, right?
Yeah,
Because there's so you are covering so much ground. You're looking at this group, you're looking at the cultural history, you're looking at the music history, you're looking at this evolution. So it's a huge ask. And so I felt kind of the infusion of the personal story to be kind of a nice grounding tent pole
yeah.
throughout the whole book.
Thank
I
you.
thought it was well done.
Thank you.
So you're also, again, because you are doing so much throughout this whole book, you are also kind of tracking the evolution of media throughout this
Yeah.
book. So from records to digital streaming. So, I'm just going to pick your brain. In your opinion, what was the best format? And what do you think might be the next iteration of media?
It's a good question. I mean, if you look behind me, like I have, all these tapes and CDs, right? I mean, so I know that the audio file is going to say vinyl, right?
Mhm,
Which, I totally understand. I feel like the best format for me was the format I had basically growing up, which is like CDs,
mhm,
especially, right? I mean, like I love tapes. And like there's something about, one with tapes, you can make mixtapes, which is something I love to do, growing up. But CDs, obviously, you can skip, right? You can skip to your favorite
mhm.
song. It's easier to replay a song. You can have more CDs, right? I mean, like, I have a bunch of vinyl, but at a certain point, it's like, okay, I might have to like get a bigger place, right? I mean, like, so at some point, like vinyl collecting is amazing, but it's also expensive too
Mm,
nowadays, right? I feel like CDs, you can own more of them. They're not as expensive. Like I think they could be, if you are sort of like, I'm gonna try to clean my CDs, they might be a little easier to clean, right? They're more portable, obviously. You can get a Discman still, like or find a Discman. You probably have to go on eBay, and you can still carry CDs around. And then of course now, like I mean, I think when you get the CD burner when the CD burner comes into play, like, I mean, I still have hundreds of mix CDs from the 2000s, like hundreds. Like, I don't even know what to do with them, right? I just feel like the CD, you get the best of both worlds, right? I mean, in terms of like, you could still even have, CDs that have, the designs on them, right? I mean,
oh,
like, so
yeah.
you get that piece, of course, but the liner notes that you get with, if you get
Mm,
vinyl, right? I mean, so like CDs, best of both worlds. Like, they scratch, but tapes can break. And
mhm,
and when tapes break, it becomes very, sort of onerous to try to like sort of fix it. Right. I mean, so
yeah.
yeah, for me, it's CDs, but I know the
Mhm.
audio file is going to say vinyl.
Do you dare guess what the next music iteration, the next form of music might be?
I mean, that's a great question because no, I remember there was that time, I think it was in the mid to late 90s, right? I don't know if you remember this, where like Sony tried to do the mini disc.
Yes, I do remember that.
And I remember thinking like, "Wow, that looks cool," and then it's you go to see how much they cost, and they're like $30. You're like, "Wait, what?" So, like, I'm not gonna buy this for like $30, and then, like, the mini disc player would like, cost, like, hundreds of dollars, and you're just like, like, you're just looking, you're like, "Yeah, I don't think this is gonna work," right? I mean, like,
Yeah,
it's just, and it didn't work, right? I mean, like, so, like, there was, like, that gap where it's just, like, the mini disc was just, like, they tried to do it, didn't work, and then it's, like and then we shipped and then it was, like, as this is happening, the thing that we don't know is coming is the MP3,
yeah,
right? Like, that's the thing that comes and that really sort of ushers in, this disruption in the music industry. And yeah, like, I feel like, the event, like the sort of the creation of the MP3 and the sort of popularizing that is obviously what put us on a path towards streaming because streaming is sort of the compromise and the solution to, well, we need to stop all the pirating of music. We need to stop all the leaking of
yeah,
all these albums that plagued the 2000s, that, frankly, like many of us, sort of benefited from in many ways, like saved a lot, saved some money, right? I mean, but so like what's coming next? It's a great question because either it could either be something digital, right? I mean,
mhm,
in the sense of like, okay, something again that we are able to sort of hold as much music as we can in the palm of our hand. Or what we've been seeing is a sort of resurgence in people going back to physical media. right? I mean, there have always been vinyl collectors. You go to antique stores, you go to these record conventions, you go to Goodwill, and you're starting to see more CDs. And you go to some music stores, you're starting to see more tapes. There are more places that are selling more DVDs and Blu-rays, right? I mean, so I feel like we are in this weird moment where it's hard to say what's going to come next, but there's a lot of people who are going back to old forms of media because they feel alienated by the streaming model, right? Whether it
Right.
is Spotify and them really pushing AI playlists, AI
Mm,
artists, AI music, but then of course their relationship to problematic institutions and organizations,
mm,
or the fact that, yeah, like if you are doing Amazon Music or something, like and Amazon goes down, you don't have access to the music or to what you want to watch. Something similar could happen with Apple, right? I mean, and no, I remember it took me a long time to even go to Apple Music because I remember seeing someone talk about how Apple Music sort of like would just like gobble up their whole music collection. Like, and I was like, what? Like, no, I'm not doing that. I mean, so it's like, it's just like I think we're seeing like there are more and more people who want a more sort of tactile, experiential. They want more experiential engagement with media and with
mm,
culture. And I think yeah, artists who are now sort of re-releasing all their music again, special editions on vinyl, CD, tape, artists who are releasing their new music on all these formats. And there's something communal about going to record stores and sort of buying music and being around a bunch of other people who are buying music. I feel like we're in a weird moment where it's like, yeah, like people are going backwards, but then also people also being alienated from streaming, but still using it because it is sort of the probably at this point the cheapest way to
mhm.
consume at least music. And of course, yeah, who knows? Like, I mean, something is probably obviously in the works and we just don't know about it. Right. I mean, like
Yeah.
so it's hard for me to even imagine because I'm like, what could go beyond having, most of the music on your phone? Like, I don't know. I guess there has to be some other device that allows us to do something similar. And if I could answer that question confidently, I would stop being a historian and I would probably, go somewhere and just like become a psychic or something. Cause I, I have no clue what could come after streaming, right? I mean, it would have like, I just don't know.
I know, historians aren't in the business of guessing the future. I get it, I get it, I get
Yeah.
it. So, what do you hope readers take away from this book?
I mean, so I hope readers, uh, if you pick up this book, I hope that you would sort of, be curious about De La Soul as a rap group and what makes them so important in the history of rap music and in the history of music. But then also, I would hope that, readers would sort of think about this group and, all artists in
Mhm,
their historical context, right? I mean, artists are not producing art in a vacuum even if they think they are, they're not. I mean, like so, and this is obviously the case with De La Soul, where it's just like, yeah, you listen to 3 Feet High and Rising, it's an artifact from the end in some ways, depending upon who you ask, right? I mean, which historian you ask, it's you're sort of listening to an artifact from either from the Reagan era or from the end of the Reagan era, right? I mean, like
mm.
it's like it depends upon what kind of argument you want to make, So yeah, like I hope that it sort of sparks an interest in learning about rap music generally, sort of thinking about Black history generally. But then also, I hope it inspires people, especially those who have only listened to a few De La Soul songs, to go listen to all their albums. Right? I mean, like, so like that's why I include the listening guide in the back. In the listening guide is sort of also designed to sort of spark more curiosity about, other artists as well. Right? I mean, because, if artists they're not producing art in a historical vacuum, nor are they producing it in an artistic vacuum. Like they're sort of constantly pulling inspiration from artists who came before them or their contemporaries, right? I mean, so I think that piece is important as well. So yeah, like you buy this book, go get all their CDs or vinyl or tapes and listen to the full albums, which is something I tell my students, right? There was a conversation that we had in class and we were talking about Outkast as Aquemini. And towards the
Mm.
end of the conversation, I asked them, like, so how many of you had listened to a full Outkast album before today? And like one student raised their hand and I was like, what? Like, and I was just like,
Mm.
okay. this weekend, what you need to do is you need to go listen to their albums. And I told them you will not be disappointed, right? I mean, because they have one of the best discographies in rap. And it's just like, yeah, when artists are like, we are living sort of in a playlist, sort of era, but not all artists are producing songs just so then they could be on a playlist. There are
Right.
artists, especially in rap, who see songs as part of a larger piece of work, and then in that larger piece of work is the album, where they're trying to tell a story. And this obviously isn't limited to rap. This is a lot of artists who put out albums, right? I mean, like, they're trying to tell you a story about either something that's going on in their life, their times, something else, or they're trying to take you to another world. It's fantasy, right? I mean, like, they're trying to tell you a story. And I believe that when you listen to music, especially in the album format, that's one of the more enriching aspects of listening, right? I mean, so of course you get this sort of the sonic pleasure, but you're also getting to know the artist in some way, and you're getting to sort of learn about a story, or you're listening to a new story more than likely, right? And whether it's 3 Feet High and Rising or Biggie's Ready to Die, right? I mean, like, he's
Mm.
telling a story on that album, right? I mean, like, about himself, what it meant to sort of grow up in Brooklyn, to grow up around around a lot of violence, to sort of struggle with mental health, to struggle with other sorts of issues that are taking place in his family life. That album is a story, right? I feel like, if for the folks who do not listen to albums as much, they're just missing out on so much, because
Yeah.
you just never know what you can learn. So, yeah, you buy the book, and you read the book, or you get the book from the library, or you borrow the book from someone, or you listen to the book. Please go listen to De La Soul's music afterwards, right? Go listen, and not just the popular songs. Go listen to the full albums, because you will not regret it.
And then where should people go when they finish your book and they wanna learn more about you and your work?
So I have, like, I'm on social media. So you can, probably look me up on Blue Sky. On Instagram, I'm probably more active there. I'm still active on Facebook. Not as active on X for a lot of reasons. It's just like, well, I'm just not there anymore. I also have a website. I believe it's Austin C. McCoy. So, like, yeah, you can find me in, website. You can find me on most social media platforms. And then, of course, if you need to, you can just Google me, and you'll find me too.
And I can attest to your listeners that he's a fantastic social media follow, so definitely consider giving him a follow. And before I let you go, I know I've held you captive. I've asked you so
No,
many
you're good.
questions because the book was so fantastic, but is there anything we haven't covered yet that you want future readers to know?
I mean, I feel like we covered a lot. And no, I think that, well, one thing I would say, and this is sort of an open invitation, because I've gotten some cool responses to the book. I'm always just curious about what sort of grabbed others when reading this book, right? I mean, so, like, what struck you? And because, yeah, like, again, sort of, this is my interpretation is just one, and it's one of many. And I was just fortunate enough to be able to write about it. But no, there should be others who come after me and write about it as well. So,
Hmm.
no, I'm always just I'm curious about what you thought, but also will be curious about what other readers think.
Well, for me, it was my adolescence all over again. So,
Yeah, definitely,
so
definitely.
yeah. So to the listeners out there, pick up your copy of Living in a Daisy Age. It is a rich, thoughtful analysis of not only De La Soul, but of hip hop and of the evolution of the genre throughout the 80s, the 90s, and the 2000s. You'll be transported to another era and you will not want to put it down. Thank you again, Dr. McCoy.
No, thank you. Thank you for having me.
My thanks again to Dr. McCoy for spending his time with me. If you want to be transported to another era and learn about the early days of hip hop and the origins of one of the most influential groups of their generation, then I recommend grabbing yourself a copy of Living in a Daisy Age. You can find it wherever fine books are sold or through my affiliate link on bookshop.org. Thanks, peeps. I'll see you next time. Thanks for sitting down with me as I explored this chapter of American history. If you liked what you heard, be sure to subscribe and share with your friends. I look forward to our next cup of coffee together.